one is just not enough. That is why we expect 5 different property tax reform proposals in the first few weeks of the 2026 Iowa legislative session. Hi, I'm Dave Price. We have Senate Republicans, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, House Democrats, and Governor Kim Reynolds. 5 different proposals expected on this topic. This week, we will talk to 2 of the top Republican leaders involved. And of course, Republicans still have sizable majorities in both the House and the Senate, so they will largely determine what does or does not happen with property tax reform. So we hear from 2 of the top Republican leaders on what to expect in this debate.
I think that this year, obviously last year, I probably would have given you the same answer, but we were unable to achieve the goal of getting property taxes done. But we've heard from Iowans since we left session last year. One of the good things that came from last session is we kind of started down the path and even admitted at the beginning it may be hard to get there in 1 year. And I think we've taken the interim to put us in a position where we've heard from Iowans. We recognize the lack of certainty they feel exists in the current system. And one of the things I've really talked about with the caucus and in general is while this issue is complicated when it gets into the weeds, is we need to make sure that our priority is the taxpayer, the certainty for the taxpayer. If you enter this conversation and that is your objective, it's a lot easier than coming in it and trying to get so deep into the weeds, you just end up not being able to achieve anything. So what I think you're going to see from the House is going to be a bill fairly early on in session that would provide certainty for the taxpayer and at the same time something that's easy to understand and digest. I don't think it's helpful for us to pass a bill that's so complicated Iowans can't understand, we can't understand. Those are a few of the things that we're kind of leading into session with on that topic as our objectives and our guiding light when it comes to what the policy will look like.
I feel like talking to you early in 2025, while on the Senate side, it felt like a more firm, yes, we're going to do this kind of thing with property taxes. And I sensed talking to you earlier in 2025 that you were maybe a harder maybe than a yes. Was it the complexity of all of it, or what was your hesitancy to think you can bang it through in 1 year?
My hesitancy would be not necessarily, the hesitancy hasn't been that it's important and a priority. It's the fact that I've been around here for 20 years and I've been a part of things that I know how difficult they are to be able to get them done. That doesn't make me special or unique. It just comes from time from being here. And I know that when you put yourself in a position where we will achieve something, it sets you up when it's something is this complicated. That being said, for this session, I have a lot more confidence going into this session than we did last year. But I also wouldn't say last year was a wasted exercise either. I think we really have gotten a lot of good feedback. We've brought this issue, the voters have brought it to us, they want something to address, but we've also brought it to where we're getting a lot of good feedback. And so my confidence level heading into this session is much higher than it maybe would have been coming into last session. Partially, like I said, it sometimes takes a few years to get really hard things done. And this is a really difficult thing that needs to be addressed.
So what do you think this session's all about?
Property taxes in 2 words. I think that's become pretty evident. Last year, we had 3 iterations that came out, joint conversations between the House and the Senate. At the end of it, we didn't find consensus. Those conversations have continued with the governor's office also getting engaged in those conversations. I think we'll see 3 bills come out very early on in session, 1 from the Senate, 1 from the House, 1 from the governor's office. And then we'll sit around a table and pick the pieces that work best and put them all together into one plan that will provide property tax relief for Iowans.
Explain to folks why having each separate entity do its own property tax reform bill and then you kind of put them all together and pick the best stuff. Why does that work better than just having one lead and then the others join in later?
I think that's part of the collaborative process, right? I mean, the legislation process should be collaborative in nature, right? We should come to the table with different ideas, maybe different points of focus. And at the end of the day, we should compare where we overlap. And I think that's really important. I think that divests a sense of ownership amongst, all 3, both chambers and the governor's office at that point in time. In those conversations, ultimately, in the past, and will continue to lead us to the best proposal. So that's why I think it's important.
In a former life, you were a mayor. You're the mayor of Spillville. And I'm curious what the mayor of Spillville would be thinking about if he heard that state legislators are all meeting in a room about how to change property taxes.
Yeah, I'd be concerned. Yeah, well, we had those conversations. Well, I was mayor over the 20 years. We made some changes, right? My concern is, and again, I've expressed this, that the state doesn't squeeze a balloon, right? So we're careful about how we craft property taxes. We talk about, tax levy caps. That was a conversation that came up last year, and how the property tax final bill works and interacts with small communities, large communities, cities and counties, be able to provide services, right? I think that's the end of the day. Provide services and growth, provide those things that the residents expect from those communities, water, sewer, infrastructure. So I would be wanting them to be very careful in their approach to make sure we didn't unintentionally squeeze a balloon in an attempt to provide property tax relief that would lead communities to have to make, really, really hard decisions about services. That's what I would be concerned about.
What is more likely, do you think, to happen this session? That you all agree on some kind of surgical, structural changes, maybe, a handful of them, however many that would be, or a completely new system altogether?
I've been pretty clear, we have a 40-year-old system, right? We put a lot of Band-Aids on that over the 40 years. Those Band-Aids have added complexity to the system. I'm an advocate. If we're going to make change, let's tear it down to the chassis and let's build it back up from there.
Now, Republican lawmakers have mentioned this as well, but Democratic legislators have repeatedly said that any type of property tax reform must make sure that it does not severely limit local leaders' ability to provide the critical services their communities need. Now, when you step back and look at Republicans here, they have had one-party control for nearly a decade now. They have identified property tax reform as the priority in 2026. So we will see what kind of pressure they feel to deliver on this reform when they know they will then have to bring whatever they do this year before voters when Iowans head to the polls this November. That is Inside Iowa Politics for this week.